Hey, it's Juanita, and you're listening to Unboxed because behind the scenes is the real story. I'm really grateful for this platform because the reason why I pushed myself to start it is because a lot of the advice I give as a talent manager, sometimes I wish I could give it en masse. Because I feel like there's things that talent, particularly talent from Black communities, may not necessarily be aware of. And I have an insight as a talent manager, but also as someone that goes through the negotiation process with the people that I work with. So again, for those of you that don't know, I've always had marketing and communications background. I've worked in a number of sectors and have been running my own talent management agency since 2019. So 6 years now, as well as my overarching business, which works in marketing and communications for the last 8. And this voice note, I wanted to focus on 2 things that I think artists categorically need to know. One is about intellectual property, and one is about representation. Now, I'm going to try and keep things on an even keel because I'll probably think of this and think of this and think of this and move around the topics and based on how the flow of things go, because really what I do is I just come and talk to you. So there may be a part 2, there may be a part 3, because this is a topic that I won't be able to cover everything in one voice note. But ultimately, there are so many strands to this conversation. So I'm going to start where I think people need to prioritize. So I'm going to start with intellectual property first. The key things that I would want anybody moving into this industry, and before I really get into it, I'm going to be looking at not only those 2 subjects, but I'm also going to be looking at it through the lens of a Black woman who works in industry. And again, because the majority of my clients are from the Black communities, I'm going to be looking at it through that experience, that particular lens. So I think it's really important that I caveat everything by saying, 1, I'm not an intellectual property specialist. So I would always encourage you, as I say to my 16-year-old, if anyone's ever saying anything to you, great, but you need to have evidence. So I would always encourage you to do your own research. And this is just a perspective. And that's my second point. It's a perspective. Everyone's going to have their own individual experiences, but these are what I've seen from mine. And like my intention for Unbox, this is just me talking to you on a level, one-on-one. So let's see how everything flows. And if it comes down to it, I might do a part 2 or split it up or whatever. So, intellectual property. I think the key thing that people need to realize is that everybody has intellectual property, right? So anything that you produce creatively, writing, music, art, digital art, even though AI makes, there are some complications around that, but that's another topic. But when you produce, and you produce for public consumption, then you have intellectual property. It has your DNA in it, your creative DNA in it, and therefore you automatically generate rights to that work. And I'm talking about work that you've created from scratch, not necessarily if you're sampling something or whatever. Original work that you've written and created from scratch, right? So there is something in when you put that intellectual property in the world, there's a value to it. Now, everybody has the right to value their work at however they deem fit, at whatever it is that they deem befitting for that work. Just as everybody has the right to make a decision as to whether or not they want to purchase or partake in that work. And the bit that I particularly want to talk about is when someone, like a brand, approaches you and says, we want to be part of, we want to utilize your intellectual property and align that with our brand. Now, one of the things that can happen is one of two things. A brand can come to you and you can swing your bat super hard and you're like, well, I want 1.5 million. And your work might be worth 1.5 million. But there is a value in just understanding actually where you sit in the market, how much you can price and value your work at. And that can come from having conversations with other people. I know people don't always like talking about money. But there is something in terms of trying to find benchmarks for yourself. And one thing I would say to you is that do not ask the people that you're working with how much you should be charging. Do not ask a brand that. I would understand if you ask the brand, do you have a budget? That is different because that understands the parameters, helps you understand the parameters within which you're working in. But do not ask them, ask trusted allies, people you've worked with that are in your space. Because I think one thing that people forget is that I've seen a lot of articles of people saying, for example, people who make money from being quote unquote influencers. I've seen a lot of people that work in agencies go, oh, I don't see why they get paid so much. You know, it's not, we can't see the return on investment, etc., etc. But one thing I think that people forget is being an influencer, where your full-time job is creating content. A lot of the people that you're going to be speaking to who are coming to you from agencies and brands, they get paid every month. They're employees. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But their loyalty is to their brand, and they do not have the understanding of what it takes to do what you do. Do you know how complicated and complex it is to film video, sometimes with no crew, edit video, render video, make sure the sound sounds great, make sure the lighting looks great? That's a lot of work, right? So, and being a content creator isn't a guaranteed job. You know, it depends on, you're always working towards your next contract. Yeah. So there needs to be an appreciation on both sides, artist and commissioning side, that there is a level of risk to this work. It's not a frivolity, right? So that's one thing. People can kind of swing their bat and then they start asking for numbers that really, you have to be realistic and be like, does this genuinely track? Is it really at this point? Or even just saying, will the market accept? Could the market take that stretch point, right? But the other way that people can go is that they suddenly become very grateful. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that anyone wants to work with me, little old me. Why? Like, you know. And I get it. And I spend a lot of my time, you know, making sure that talent understand that actually, if they're coming to you, it's because they've seen something of value, and you really need not lose sight of that. So I think there's a balance. And again, this is a perspective. I think there is a balance where it's like, yes, I love your brand. I'd love to work with your brand, but you have to pay me accordingly. And we have seen so many reports, which is, it's not even, exclusive to this sector. It is just employment wide, where people talk about the fact that, black talent gets underpaid. I was just on Instagram the other day and came across a clip between Sway, who is an American DJ, and the rapper and presenter and actor Exhibit. And Exhibit was talking about a show called Pimp My Ride. Those of you who are in the same age bracket as me will know Pimp My Ride, because I don't know if they show it on MTV anymore. But it was a really popular show in the 90s where basically they would take, old jacked up cars and they would wrap them in, and give them beautiful designs and everything. Like Pimp My Ride was a thing. It was a cultural moment. And Exhibit talks about it, and he was like, he was getting $5,000 per episode. $5,000 per episode. This is a multinational organization, MTV, global conglomerate, if that's the right term, and they were paying him $5,000 per episode. And he says, it's the agent's fault. The agent took a rough deal. And I take offense to that, because I've seen Steve Harvey say the same thing, that, he's had managers, people that do the work that I do. I'm not ignorant to the fact that there are some people who are charlatans in the world. And I take pride in the fact that I've had my clients who have been in that industry for a long time go, oh, you're not like other managers, because I don't come from that world. The world that I come from is a world that wants to empower people that look like me, and wants to make sure that they're represented, So I always say that actually this thing, it's very easy to say, oh, it was someone else's fault. But this is where we come back down to the responsibility that you as an artist, as talent, have. Because talent it's a business. Yeah? Like, yes, you may be a creative. Yes, you may not necessarily know all there is to know about business. And no one's necessarily asking you to do that. But one, you have to make the effort to find out what you don't know. So, and find out enough to protect yourself. And this is my rally cry to you. When it comes to intellectual property, when you go into meetings and you want to talk about a particular concept or piece of work or whatever, like there are things called non-disclosure agreements, for example, which means we can come in the room and have this discussion, but you're not entitled to anything in here. And you're not allowed to take anything in here and go off and do stuff with it because you think it's a good idea. And actually the intellectual property that we discuss in this room is mine. And we've agreed that for a particular period of time, 5-10 years, until someone decides that, this agreement is null and void. Yeah. So make sure that you are doing your due diligence to make sure you protect yourself. Yes, in part, it's your team, if you have one, it's their responsibility. But I always say to people, as an artist, you are also a brand in your own right. So make sure that you are doing everything you can to protect that. And make sure you value it as best as you possibly can. There is nothing worse. And I have experienced this myself as someone who negotiates contracts, where someone says to you, okay, what's the fee you want? And you say, okay, I want X amount. And they go, yeah, okay. There is nothing worse than that feeling, because you know that there was more room. They were prepared to pay more for you. So that's why when I was about 16, someone said to me, never play your hand first. Ask people what they want, and then that gives you the information to start making decisions. So that's one aspect of intellectual property that I really wanted to talk to you about. I really have a passion for making sure that, like I said, particularly those from the Black communities don't sell that kind of stuff, or have a real understanding of the value of what they're doing. And I kind of move on to representation. So I was doing some work for one of my projects the other day, and we were recording a podcast, and one of the contributors told us a story about someone that worked in the TV industry who had done really great work that had been noticed by a major broadcaster. And they said, yes, we love it. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And then partway through the project, they decided that they wanted to replace the creator with someone else. And that really destroyed that person to the point that they didn't work in the industry anymore. And this is the thing, when, I don't know if you've seen some of the conversations around the deal that Ryan Coogler, the director of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Sinners more recently, particularly the deal that he's done with the producers. Like, people need to understand this is not, even, let's say 20 years ago, where you had to wait for permission to do anything. Technology allows us to be able to access spaces without gatekeepers, right? But anyway, if there are areas that you want to get into and it's more of a quote unquote traditional route, there's representation. So you have people like me who invest our time in making sure that we're safeguarding the talent that we represent, right? And the element that I want to talk about is about something that was phrased in a conversation that I was having in the last couple of days, was just because you're in the room doesn't mean you're of the room. And I'll explain what that means. One of the things that I've had to swallow as an agent is I'm very aware that I am a dark-skinned Black woman in an industry where, there aren't a lot of us doing this work. There's people doing the work, but visibly. And also, the workplace isn't devoid of the experiences of your day-to-day life. Now, I get it. People always say, don't dwell on the fact that you're a woman. Don't dwell on the fact that you're a Black woman. Just do the work, right? But the reality is that sometimes just doing the work isn't enough. There are luxuries that are afforded to others that aren't afforded to us. So when it comes to representation and you're in the room with people, and this kind of marries hand in hand with the intellectual property thing. I don't know about you, but for a lot of my working career, and I have been working since I was 14, I'm 41 in the next couple of weeks, in the next week, at the time of recording this, I've been the only one in the room. And people's biases and prejudices do not stop at the door when they start at work. So it's really important that when you're building a team or when you're dealing with a team, no one says you need to go in there and fight. No one says you have to go in there and be belligerent. But you have to be absolutely clear on your own brand, where your parameters are, what you are and aren't prepared to do. And also have to understand that there is a level of nuance that you have as black talent. And again, it's not a monolith. Like they always say, black people aren't a monolith. So it's not always the same for everybody. But there are some common markers, right? And even then, whilst it might not be common for us as a community, as we're looking at each other, because we understand that, you know, different from, it's like even in the West Africas, I, as a Sierra Leonean person, whilst I'm West African, have a different life experience to a Nigerian, have a different life experience to a Ghanaian, we understand that. But we also have to understand from those outside, they just see what they can visually see, not always nuance and not always having the ability to understand the levels, the power within our history, our narrative, our lived experiences, the things, the secret sauce that means that we have influenced literature and music and television and all sorts, fashion. So all those considerations do not stop because you're not Beyonce. They don't stop because you're not your favorite influencer that you see, whoever that is. Those things still apply to you. I wrote an article a few years ago about how it was important that when you're going in rooms and you're negotiating and that kind of thing, you know, it's difficult if the other person that's in the room, I'm not saying, let me caveat this before I go further. I'm not saying that everybody of a person of color has to be represented by a person of color. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying there aren't people who are, you know, outside of the culture who aren't allies. I've built relationships with people in publishing where, you know, they've been brave enough to go, do you know what, Juanita? That happened because such and such is black. Because they know. And I thank those people for being as transparent as that. You might not necessarily be able to do anything about it, but the fact that you acknowledge that there is a difference in the way that people are treated means that people feel less gaslit about the experiences that they have, that people are moving into spaces with an informed decision, an informed context, I should say, so that they can make informed decisions, right? But what I am saying to you is, if you cannot, I suppose you, like I've said previously, have to understand your position and your difference. You have to understand that in order to safeguard and protect and to avoid betraying yourself. I have seen many a person go in a room and be like, do you know what? Because the other person is white, therefore I have to flex and bend and pander because they automatically know more than me. They're in a position of power, and therefore if I have them on side, my career is going to progress. Absolutely not. I'm not saying it doesn't come without risks. I remember speaking to someone who was working for a TV show, and they were having difficulties. We've heard these stories about getting someone to do their hair or whatever, their makeup looks bad. And it's like, but why don't you just ask? And the response was, but, you know, it's all right for you to say that, but I can't risk my position. Imagine that. How sad is that? That we can't go in our full excellence into a space and simply just bring the essence, the qualities of who we are without assessing whether or not we're going to be punished for it. and unfortunately it is a reality. And I say this, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Again, just before I came on to record this, I was reading a LinkedIn post about someone was saying that we shouldn't shelter our children from the realities of being black and brown people in industry. Yes, it might shake their core, but knowledge is power, right? So coming back to representation, it is really important that actually, if you can, that you have either allies who at least somewhat get it in your team, or someone that looks like you that you trust gets it in your team. Because this is how we grow. Because like I always say to people who come on board with me, there's things that I'm going to see that you're not, and vice versa. And the way that I see it is that we are back to back in the trenches together. I'm here, I struggle with talent manager because people have perceptions like you have to take people on the journey, because people think as soon as you've got management, that means that that person's responsible for, blowing you up, for lack of a better phrase. And don't get me wrong, they're there to support you. But if you as an artist, as the talent themselves, aren't prepared to handle your business, this isn't the business for you, It's like what they say about accounting and HMRC. If you're not on top of your books, you can't just say, oh yeah, it was my accountant's fault. My accountant didn't tell me that. HMRC, don't give a damn. You're responsible for it. You're liable for it. You're going to jail. It is good business practice for you to understand what is going on with your work around you, because you need to be able to pivot. If at any point the people that are in your team aren't delivering for you, you need to be able to go, actually, do you know what? Love where we've got to, but we're going to have to change now, because in order for us to get to the next stage, we need to do X, Y, and Z. There's no shame in that. I've done that in terms of ending contracts, and I've been on the receiving end of that, right? But I've always been clear as a talent manager. My job is to get you as far as I can. But even if an opportunity comes up, which is going to propel you further, my friend, I'm going to push you. Even if that means you leaving me, go. Because my purpose in life is not to have you as talent tied to me. The reason why I do this work is because I want to be a part of helping people propel forward. Right? So representation is so critical. So critical to making sure that you are taken care of appropriately. Otherwise, you'll be depleted. Now, I have just scratched the surface, because as I'm talking to you, I already know that I'm going to have to do an episode on talking about the other side, about what it's like being a talent manager. Because I think there is a perception around talent managers that they're charlatans, they bleed you with money and whatever. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not saying there aren't people that behave like that, but there are also people who are here that really want to advocate and support the talent that they work alongside. And some of the challenges that come with that when people don't understand people's roles, and also things like loyalty, that kind of thing, right? But I'll end here on this. If there are any other aspects that you want me to talk about, and I'll probably listen back to this and say, actually, I would love to have spoken about X and I would have loved to have spoken about Y. Look in the About Us and description and just get in touch with me. Tell me, or drop a comment. Tell me what resonated. Tell me what didn't resonate. Tell me where you think I'm wrong. Tell me where your perspective lies. But the key things that I want you to take away from this is that, please, when you're going into rooms, don't be blinded by the light of a big brand. Don't be blinded by the insecurities you may have as to the quality or the value or your worthiness. Don't let those things betray you. And also, if you are an artist that is from, a black or brown background, please also never forget the context that you're working within. That doesn't mean, again, for clarity, that you have to be aggressive, but it is really important to be aware. Just aware, so that if anything does happen, you're ready to move or you're ready to protect yourself. Knowledge is power. Have a look at the World Intellectual Property Office website. They've got resources on there. They've got free courses on there. Equip yourself. Value yourself. Protect yourself. Until the next voice note.